My next Bitcoin price prediction could shock you. It's not necessarily what you want to hear, but I think it's something that you must. Guys, let's jump down into the charts and take a look at what's going on here with Bitcoin and why my price prediction for BTC is going to be a little bit shocking for any new retail investors out there. So here we have got ourselves a bit of a bearish setup at the moment, right? We've been talking about this one for the last couple of days. Now, this is, of course, just on the smaller timeframes. This is not the larger timeframes. These aren't macros. These are short timeframes. These are the micro movements of what's happening with Bitcoin, right? And so when we're talking about the price prediction, I'm going to be talking about my kind of medium to longer term viewpoints for Bitcoin. We do, of course, have some interesting news which we're going to talk about, and we are, of course, going to be talking a little bit about where I think things are heading in that longer term. So let's start things off with the charts, right? So in the charts here for Bitcoin, we have got lower highs and lower lows, right? This is a continuation of what we've seen going on the smaller time frames. On the slightly larger time frames, it's not as scary. We did, of course, talk about this little area, this yellow box between 57,238 and 59,955 just a few days ago. And we did come into this area once, twice, three times. So we've hit into this range three times. Every single time we've come into that $60,000 support range, and specifically our yellow box targeted range here, we have rejected the idea of going down lower, and we've rallied on up. Okay, now this, for anyone who wants to kind of understand, if I go up into our daily time frame and just make this a little bit bigger for you guys to see, we were talking about a three-wave pattern. That is what this is, right? This is our correction to the downside here, and it is a big ranging market. Okay, I'm going to get into this in a moment, but before we do that, let's jump back into that 4-hour time frame. Okay, because on the 4-hour time frame, we do find ourselves at the moment with some heavy resistance. Now, I've spoken about this many times over and over, so hopefully it's not new to any of you guys out there. But essentially, Bitcoin is finding itself below the 200 EMA on the 4-hour time frame, and it is looking at this area as resistance today being Sunday, and this could be a bit of a tell as to where the rest of today and potentially next week is going to be heading. The 200 exponential moving average works as a trend filter. If you're lower than the 200 EMA, you're bearish. If you're higher than the 200 EMA, you're bullish, right? So when we take a look at the charts here, we can see the white line coming through here, the 200 EMA, currently sat at 65,868. Okay, so the bulls are going to be looking at this on the 4-hour time frame here and basically looking to try to rally the price up higher. They're going to want to get the price above and closed above that 200 EMA. If it fails to do so, that's going to be problematic for BTC. You can see here, though, we have found support on the 50 exponential moving average. This is the blue line that's coming through here. We have had a couple of fake outs, though, so it'll be interesting to see what goes on. We will be looking ultimately at that 200 EMA as the main trend filter. Okay, the yellow line is the 50 simple moving average. It hasn't really got anything to kind of talk about here on the 4-hour time frame. Okay, now if I bring up our stochastics, you can see that we are in the overbought range when it comes to the stochastic RSI. Now, the stochastic RSI is like your relative strength index, okay? Yeah, your relative strength index is great for a trend. If you're in a trend, it's going to basically tell you whether you're overbought, oversold, where momentum is going to be shifting or not shifting, whether you've got more room to the upside or more room to the downside. The stochastic RSI is more sensitive to price movements and is much better for a ranging market, and that is where Bitcoin finds itself right now. This correction that we've seen to the downside is a short-term correction, and it is a ranging market, bouncing between $60,000 and $70,000 on repeat. It hasn't changed much. Okay, so when we come back into our charts here, we see that stochastic RSI is up in the overbought area. We have to acknowledge that this is not a good place for BTC to be in. We can also see just here that the yellow line, which is our stochastic RSI, has just crossed lower than our white line, which is the smoothing. Okay, it is the moving average of all stochastic RSIs on this time frame. And so basically what that tells us is that the short-term price action is now lower than the average price action, which we can also see from the EMAs, the SMAs, and all that. But from a stochastic point of view, that's showing we actually have momentum about to shift down. Okay, we're about to see selling pressure rather than buying pressure. It's going to be really interesting. So here in the Bitcoin price, you can see this rejection, you can see the stochastic RSI crossing, but we're not just overbought on the 4-hour, we're also overbought on the 8-hour. So we are looking at a bit more room to the downside. Now, here we can also see that this new local low is a very interesting tell. We've had a little bit of a run to the upside. If we do get rejected here, I'm not looking necessarily for a new lower low, but I am looking for us to move back down into that kind of $61,000 level. If we do slip down lower, it's going to be really, really interesting. Now, if I go ahead and put on our smart money concepts over the top of this, it can be a little bit cluttered, so you can see a lot more stuff's kind of cropped up here. The main thing I want to point out is this one just here, this change of characterization on the 4-hour time frame. This is showing us that we are actually now in a bearish structure, and although we've had this relief rally here, we've not changed outside of this bearish pattern. Okay, so smart money concepts, which basically tracks big liquidity players in the market, is telling us that we are in a bearish structure, and we should acknowledge that. You can also see that our 200 EMA is up here on equilibrium, which an equilibrium for smart money concepts is essentially a 50% area between where the premium prices, which is the red areas at the top here, and the discounted prices, which are the ones down at the bottom. Okay, so what we have here is the equilibrium, the 50% fib level between those 2 points, is right there on that 200 EMA. Now, the importance of this is it's highly likely and highly probable that with our bearish structure, being the fact that we are in fact in a bearish change of characterization of the smart money concepts for BTC USDT pairing, we're coming up against equilibrium, we're coming up against the 200 EMA and finding resistance here, that the prediction, the price prediction for Bitcoin isn't going to be looking too healthy. So let's now bring this up into our daily time frame and talk about it. Where are we thinking things are likely to go? I'm going to turn off smart money concepts here for a moment. Back into play a little bit later, but here you can see we have this ranging market. We had our targeted range down here. We do of course have our relief rally, which we were kind of talking about the resistance being up there at 69,000 to 68,000, or 68 to 69,000. Chances are that we might not make that. Hopefully we do. We look at this as a 3-wave pattern up towards that range, so short-term correction, medium-term pump up towards 68k, but rejection there could be pretty damning. We look at this as a potential resistance area where we have more slippage to the downside. And as I've spoken about many times before, I'm looking at that 200 daily EMA, which that 200 daily EMA is coming in at a really good point for Bitcoin. Healthy correction, and we'll get into the news as to why we call this a healthy correction and what we see time and time again in just a moment. But for Bitcoin's price action here, we are looking at a 3-wave pattern. Now, it's possible that it completes down here. And of course, we have a breakout, which we'll be monitoring. Okay, breakout for me will be anything higher than 73,777. It'll break this idea and it'll prevent us from going down into this particular structure. If, however, we get rejected at 68, 69k, then we are, of course, going to be looking at that 200 daily EMA. That 200 daily EMA is currently sat at $50,741. Okay, it is going to change. It's probably going to lift up a little bit. And if we were to see rejection from that kind of 68, 69k area, then we are going to be targeting out just down here between a 1 and a 1.236, which will put my price prediction for Bitcoin at $53,000 to $55,000. Okay, and I think that's going to coincide with finding support on the 200 EMA. Now, a few days ago, I was saying that I was expecting $50,000, but the target is actually moving in line with every candle that gets printed on that daily time frame. The 200 EMA is likely to continue rising up higher over the next couple of weeks as price, in my opinion, pumps up and then absolutely dumps back down. And I think the 200 EMA is going to remain our trend filter. We're going to remain bullish, as I am remaining bullish on the market, but my expectations will be a complete washout of any of those potential weak hands in the market. We've started to see a little bit of it. We've seen a lot of liquidations, but for the most part, my expectations will be that we'll continue down just a little bit more. A lot of people believe that the bull run is over, which is just absolutely laughable in my humble opinion. And we'll kind of see, how things kind of fall. Now let's go over into the web. And here we want to talk about, what's going on slightly differently in the market, right? So here we can see that the Bitcoin halving is the most bullish setup for the Bitcoin price, and I totally agree. We've kind of been through this a number of different times where we kind of been talking about how BTC's Bitcoin halving event is going to be halving the rewards, obviously, taking it from 6.5 to 3.25. That's about, at a $70,000 Bitcoin valuation, it's about 30 million Bitcoin every single day that the miners are no longer able to kind of, get hold of and liquidate. Okay, so that's a significant amount more Bitcoin that's no longer available, right? So there's a significant amount of Bitcoin that is no longer there, right? And we've seen this within the share prices of the mining companies with them decreasing. We do see, of course, devaluation there for the obvious reasons that their revenue has been slashed in half. Now, this is really positive for the BTC price because it means that as demand comes in, there's insufficient supply to continue pushing upwards. But as I've often said, everything comes down to supply and demand. And if we don't get those things, if those things are in balance, you end up in a stable market. And if there is a significant swing in one way or the other, the market's going to be volatile, right? Insufficient supply and an increase in demand, price goes to the moon. And if you have an insufficient amount of demand and surplus supply, price dumps down. So it's important to note that the Bitcoin setup that we have here with everything that's going on with ETFs is actually a really positive place to be for BTC. And this is why in BTC history and Bitcoin history, we've always seen this kind of consolidation range just after or just before the Bitcoin halving event. And then afterwards, you just absolutely launch and it's a fantastic bull run. Now, trying to time that is incredibly difficult. Sometimes it lasts for just a short period of time, 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes it lasts 8 to 12 weeks, right? Really difficult to kind of get a good kind of anchor point on how long this consolidation is going to last, which is why I think we're likely to see that slippage down towards kind of $52,000, $55,000, and why my Bitcoin price prediction is going to be that we have that move to the downside on the short to medium term. On the longer time frames, though, I do think things are gearing up. And so Bitcoin's halving is halving 2024. So the Bitcoin halving 2024 is different this time, and it's 5 different ways that it is different. And there's only really a few things to kind of talk about in here. And I'll try to bring this up so you guys can kind of get an idea as to kind of what is going on. But basically, crypto users, the base is up by 400% since 2020, so pretty significant there. And obviously we do see a growing adoption overall, but I've been through the data and I've been through the wallets. You are actually seeing, although wallet counts high, there's actually really insufficient amounts of Bitcoin in majority of the wallets. And every time you kind of step up a level, those wallets are 50, 60% less. It's interesting, and if you want to know more about that, do join us in our free Discord. The link is in the description below. So 2024 pre-halving Bitcoin rally has not been seen before, and this is true because in Bitcoin history we haven't actually rallied up into a new all-time high before the Bitcoin halving event. We rallied up, we sure did, but then we kind of collapsed down just before or during the halving event. We didn't actually ever go into a new all-time high before the halving, and so this is something new that's very, very different than has ever happened before. So we can't just look at Bitcoin history and say history is repeating itself, because we do have underlying variables that are different. And I've been through this a number of different times over the last kind of 12 to 18 months. The underlying variables, whether you take a look at it from a technical analysis standpoint or a fundamental analysis standpoint, there are so many differences in the potential cycles that are going on right now versus what has happened in the history. We are rewriting Bitcoin's history, essentially. Miners, they're better shaped for the halving this time, and they have been more prepared. As this is the 4th halving event, they are actually getting to grips with everything that is going on, and they kind of are working out, how to kind of go ahead and continue. It's going to be interesting to see, how all that kind of stuff goes further forward. And the Bitcoin, the first Bitcoin halving with spot ETFs in the US, this is very important as well. So there's a lot of things that are changing in the space. And Bitcoin has become more globally decentralized and secure as well. And I think the future can go the other way, so we want to be a little bit cautious with that. But let's go ahead and just move on here as we kind of talk about ETFs, right? Hong Kong's investment firm Victory Securities reveals Bitcoin and Ether ETF fees, right? And we spoke about this before. Basically, we saw Bitcoin and the Ethereum spot ETFs approved over in Hong Kong. There's a little bit of uncertainty as to whether or not mainland China investors are going to be able to get access to those. Has a high probability that you might not, which means the early forecast that we saw with the Bitcoin spot ETF over in Hong Kong might actually be falling short of our targets, which is rather unfortunate, but it's interesting nonetheless. And then of course we also see that grayscale mini Bitcoin spot ETF fees are just hypothetical, and they're kind of talking about how they might be able to reduce hypothetically the fees on the mini Bitcoin ETF to 15 BPS. Now it's interesting that it's a hypothetical. They've got lots of things they have to kind of talk about as to whether or not that's something they're going to be able to do. Lots of tests to be done and all that kind of interesting stuff. But my main takeaway here is that actually Bitcoin is in a reasonably strong position, right? And we do see that there's a good reason and a good rationale for more slippage to the downside to shake out as we have done in previous years. But we shouldn't take that as a guarantee. There's a lot of things that are happening now that haven't happened before, and therefore just because typically and we would normally expect a larger shakeout during the Bitcoin halving event doesn't make it a guarantee. And so my Bitcoin price prediction for 2024, at least in the midterm, is going to be that we do see that slippage to the $55,000 level over a kind of 2, maybe 4 to 6 week period. Hard to time it, but that would be kind of my guess. After which I do expect us to see a fantastic run for Bitcoin and for the altcoins. And now is the best buying opportunity in my humble opinion. Guys, why don't you check out this video right here where Chris is talking about some of the interesting things that are going on over in the UK from a banking point of view and why you might be risking more than you might think.